Okay, so I think many of you are still confused what are getters and setters and how to use those. So today also we are going to talk about what are the getters and setters, maybe initial 10 minutes, and then we are going to talk about the object info API. That is another module, that is another JavaScript API that we get as part of LDS. So that's what we are going to cover here, and this is really going to be helpful for us to basically understand how dynamically you can fetch the information about especially on a picklist field or about a object, like the complete information about an object. So before we deep dive and go to start working on object info API, let's talk about the getter and setters again. For that, let's quickly go ahead and create a component, and I'm just naming it as getter and setters. If you want, you can just name it anything as per your, I'll say, convenience that you wanted to, but this is going to be easy for me to kind of identify the component that I have. And today we are going to expose this component to the Lightning App Builder so that we can quickly see the preview at our home page or maybe at our record page. So we'll say master label is going to set as getters and setters, and LWC target, I'll set it as home page and app page. Okay, so that is what we have. And then, yeah, first of all, what is getters and setters? So basically, getter and setters are nothing. These are like getter is a variable, setter is the used for supporting that getter variable. Okay, it looks like a method. So you can also say that these are the special kind of methods where we can perform some operations, we can perform some logic, and then work on our business use case. Maybe we have some logic and we wanted to perform before like while calling a variable or maybe utilizing it in our HTML. How? Let's quickly see that. Maybe I'm going to create a as LWC card here. Okay, so this LWC card is going to have nothing, just again title. Maybe you are going to say getters and setters. Icon could be anything. For the body paragraph, I will change it to division. Okay, and then the padding, I'm going to say around and large instead of a small. I'm just going to have the large padding. Now let's create a getter method, getter variable. So how you create a getter variable is very easy. Just use the get keyword. This is a get keyword. Okay, and the name of your variable. For example, I'm saying name. Okay, use the opening and closing parenthesis and then opening and closing curly braces. That's it. So now here your getter method must need to return. It must need to return any value. It could be integer, string, array, or array of objects, decimal, true or false. It could return anything. So your getter method must need to have a return statement. And this return statement could return anything as we talked about. So for example, let's say that, or maybe I'm just putting it as salesforce.com. And this is just the simple return statement that we are doing as part of getter. Okay. And now as this is nothing, it's a variable, it's a property. Okay. Property like similar we have here. If we create a variable like maybe welcome message. So similarly, we are going to create a variable, we are going to create a property with the help of get keyword. And this is also a property. This is also a, you can say, variable. Now, if we wanted to utilize this in our HTML, we could just use the same way like curly braces, opening and closing, and then paste the variable name. I will have one more division tag, and here we will try to utilize LWC button. Okay, this button variant could be anything. I'm going to remove it. Label, let's say that change name. Title is also same. Method we can keep as it is, and we will define it into our JavaScript. And let's try to say this dot name equal to, and this time I'm going to say Amit Singh. Okay. Now what exactly is happening now? It says that we have a variable Similarly, right, if we have to assign some value to the welcome message, we could say this dot welcome message, and we will say welcome to LWC. Just a simple dummy message that you wanted to print. And if you have this message maybe referenced somewhere in your HTML file, maybe let's utilize the paragraph, the reason, so that it will show our outcome into the different lines instead of having in the same line. So once you click on this button, it is going to perform these changes. Okay, let's go ahead and deploy this. So for what is the getter, how to define the getter, everything is like everyone is able to understand, right? Now I'm going to add that component here and do the, like, we are just going to add the component. We already know the process, how to add it. So if you could see here, we are able to see salesforce.com. That is our default value, which is returned by getter method. And then there is a button called change name. So if you really wanted to, let's say, go to console. Okay, and if you really wanted to change the name, you really have to click on this button. So if you click on change name, there is nothing happening. We're not actually able to see anything. Maybe say, I'm just saying all labels, clicking on name, but we are not able to do anything. Okay, the reason, what is the reason? Basically, if you have a getter variable and does not have that getter variable does not have a setter, so you cannot do like this. You cannot assign a value to any getter variable. It becomes read-only property. Okay, so basically, if we say that getters without a setter is read-only, like you cannot really change the getter with the help of this. Say that this dot name equal to whatever the name, whatever value you wanted to assign. It could be simple string, integer, decimal, boolean, array of objects, could be anything. And because of this line is not getting executed, this line is also not getting executed. This line is throwing some error. We are really not able to see in browser, but it really, sometimes it gives us the error in the browser console as well. So if I swap this line of like between these two, like welcome message is now the first line, and then this line is a different one, and we get back to our Salesforce org, we refresh this page and click on change name. Now you can see the welcome as welcome to LWC, but this name is not getting changed. The reason is same that we talked about. Now maybe on the click of a button, maybe on a browser event, you really wanted to change this variable, the value of this variable. So you have option to use setter. So you will say set name, and every setter is going to accept one parameter. Okay, it clearly says, if you hover over to the error, it clearly said a get accessor must have exactly one parameter. So it could be value, it could be name, it could be hello, could be anything, but usually we see as value because this value is going to be acted as a setter for this. Okay, now we have just defined the setter, we did nothing. We could do the processing here. Okay, processing means you can call the apex class, you can use fetch method, you can do whatever the business logic that you want. Okay, you could even use a UI record API, like create record, or maybe update record or delete record. Here you could do whatever the processing you want. So far we have not done anything. Let's go ahead and deploy this. And if you deploy this now, and now if you click on change name, you could see the name is changed, but this is still not changed. Anyone can tell me why this is happening, like you're not able to see the changed name? Okay,
because we have not added any logic in setter, right?
that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter if you add even a logic. Maybe if you say this dot welcome message equal to value, that's not going to make such difference. Okay, I'll maybe, yeah, I'll add it here. That is why it's happening. So first of all, this variable is going to hold whatever you are setting it here after equal. Okay, so as I have said, as Amit Singh, this variable called value is going to hold the value as Amit Singh. Okay, now you could assign it to into a variable. Maybe you could have a variable here, let's say uppercase something, and you could assign this dot uppercase equal to value dot to uppercase. Okay, there is a, I think this is the one. To uppercase is the method in the JavaScript for string objects, for string variables. So it's going to convert every letter into the uppercase. And if we really are using this variable somewhere here, we would be able to see that. But now you get, every time you call this setter, this getter is definitely going to invoked. Okay, but because this getter is returning salesforce.com every time, the value is not getting changed, even no matter what you do. So if you really wanted to get the updated value, you really have to take the help from the third variable, that is uppercase. Okay, so you can just return now here, you could say this dot uppercase. So now what is happening is, initially this is definitely going to be blank because there is no value. This is undefined. Okay, now you are clicking on a button, this method is getting invoked. You are saying set the value in a variable called welcome message to welcome to LWC. That is the local variable, that is private variable. Then you are calling this setter with the help of this dot name. This is the setter variable, saying equal to Amit Singh. And then inside this method, you are utilizing another variable called this dot uppercase, that is actually converting whatever the case that you are giving, either lower, upper, or everything, it is into the uppercase. And then as your getter method is basically referencing this variable called this dot uppercase, it's going to be executed, and the uppercase variable is going to be uh, displayed over here in the UI. Let's see if this works or not. Okay, if you click on change name, you could see here clearly now we are able to see the changes, what changes we have applied there for our getter and setter methods. Any confusion? Is it clear now, Sweta?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
What means when to use getters and setters? Means which are the scenarios where we actually think to use getters and setters?
Yeah, I was coming to that point.
Mm.
Okay, so there are a couple of scenarios where I prefer to use getters and setters. Okay, one is like let's say that there is a use case. Maybe there is a drop down here. I had a demo earlier, but now it's not there with me. So basically, what was that? Let's say that I've got a drop down here, and every time the value is getting changes into the drop down, and I wanted to make some business logic. Maybe I wanted to call out an API using fetch method of JavaScript and display the result. So I really don't need to use on change event or something, because every time the value is getting changed, the setter is going to be calculated, it is going to be called and call the method. But that's also something you could do with the on change event. One important use case that I would I would highly recommend everyone to use this getters and setters and getters. There are two things, not one, two use cases. One is when you're passing the value from parent to child, okay, and your parent actually is passing the array of records or maybe the object. Okay, it could be, let's say that your parent is passing the list of accounts into your child object, into your child parent component, not object. Or maybe your parent is passing the contact information that is going to have multiple fields, maybe name, email, title, phone, fax, address, and many more fields. Okay. So the value that you're receiving here, let's say that we've got @API, and let's say contact records. These are array. Okay. And maybe let's say @API as opportunity record. Okay. This is nothing. This is an object. So these two values, like when you are receiving the value from parent, right? If you're receiving from parent, so this becomes read only. You cannot really make any changes into these variables. If you want, you will get the error. If you really want to make the changes into these variables, you will get the error. Now, if you really wanted to, maybe let's say you wanted to iterate with each contact record or whatever the records that you're getting, do some logic manipulation and maybe add some more attribute to the same array. So what you have to do is you really have to take help from getters and setters and a third variable that is a private variable. So with the help of this getter and setters, how you will do is now you will say, okay, maybe get contact records. Okay, it's going to return, maybe you could have here, let's say local contact records. Like this, it's going to return this one, this dot local contact records. And then you will have @API and set. This is the name of your variable. It is going to accept a parameter called, I'm just making it as value, but it would be anything. And here you would say this dot local records equal to value. In this local records, you could really like do the operation. You could do array dot for each, right? And this is your variable where you wanted to have a for loop, and you can do the business logic that you really want. You could have that. So this API variable, it is saying that it should be decorator or mark public reactive properties. Okay, that's fine. So this should not be now here. That's why we are getting the error. So you could see here, the error is gone now, and you could easily able to make the changes, make any changes in this variable, and your getters and setters are going to work without impacting the parent variable that you're receiving. This is contact record. So now you have two records. One is local records that is going to have a local copy within your component. And this is the basically nothing information coming from the parent component. That is the one use case, because this @API is basically the public property. At the same time, you wanted to make it as reactive. You have to do this way. Okay. The other thing is that when you have something like you really wanted to return some static value, let's say that you have a welcome message, and here I wanted to say something like welcome to Salesforce World. If really if I have to maybe return this kind of values, this kind of variable, static variable, I would always prefer to use local property like this. But on the same line, if I have to return something like arrays or an object, I would always prefer to use get. So let's say that you have pick list values. So you could just use get, give the name, it could be options, it could be anything else, and then return the list of options that you want. We have seen, right, how to return, how to prepare the combo box for the options, because this is going to be a static value and it's really going to return something, and you really don't want it to change this value. Once you have got the value, like you've got the options, you really would not want it to change it later on. Change it in the sense like in your component, you don't want it to change. Behind the scene in the backend, it could change, and your refresh of your component would be able to take the updated value for the pick list. So these are the two use cases where I preferably use getters instead of the normal variables. This would also work as a normal variable. There is nothing else is that it would not work, but it's more convenient, and it's really like as a best practice, it's good to use more faster. Sometimes it really does the error handling kind of things when we are using the UI record API methods. So these are the couple of things that I would use getters and setters. The important thing that I would say here is, if you are using getters and setters, you really need to be careful, because every time you do something like this, let's say every time you do something like this dot contact records equal to whatever you want to do, this setter is going to get executed, and this getter is also will get executed. So if you are you really don't want it to uh, really don't want it to disturb the logic of whatever the variable you already had, you should not prefer using getters and setters, because any changes into the variable is clearly going to trigger the getters and setters. On the other hand, any changes to this variable you really wanted to perform some logic without explicitly calling the methods and doing some logic, putting every time at somewhere, you could use getters and setters. Even you could use getters and setters privately, which are only visible to your own org. You can use getters and setters that are visible to the public components, like your meta file, like your parent file as well. Like, is it clear, or it's now more confusing?
Sir, it is clear now.
Okay, thank you. Anyone
Thanks.
else? Okay, so let's talk about the agenda for today now. We are going to learn about another API called Object Info API. It really has multiple methods, but we are going to really focus on three methods. One is get object info, then other one is get picklist values, and then the third one is get picklist values by record type. So as we talked about, Object Info API is again going to return you the methods that are wire decorated. We have talked about how to utilize wire methods. And the methods that we get is within this module called UI Object Info API. So in the previous videos, in previous two videos, we have been talking about UI Record API. This is more like UI Object Info API, where it, like as its name indicates, right, you could be able to get the information about the object, its child relationships, what are its fields, what are its values, default values, data type, and many more information. It's more like the meta description of your object. Okay, that's what our Object Info API says. And get object info is the method that actually gives you the information about your object. Everything like fields, child relationship, record types, what is the theme, and many more. And as this is a wire decorator, we would be using a wire decorator with the help of a property or a function. And it only takes one parameter, that is object API name. And you would be able to provide the object API name. It could be the dynamic object API name. It could be the static API name with the help of the import that we have here. Then we have got a get picklist values. So before we go ahead for the picklist values, let's see the demo of our Object Info API. So I'm going to say Object Info API. Yeah, someone was saying something. I heard a voice. Okay, it seems like everyone is so silent. Okay, so am I like not going well? What is there any problem? No one wants to talk to me.
No, it's not right.
No, sir.
Okay, so let's talk about the very first thing, right? We talked about we are going to utilize so first, The very first step is whenever you're trying to utilize any API, like you are trying to call the Apex class method, you are going to call the Lightning modules adopters that are provided by Salesforce, we should always import the method that we really wanted to use. So the very first step is to use the import the method that is get object info. And as soon as you select get object info, you would see that the rest is being taken care, like from Lightning UI object info API. Now this is a wire decorator, so we would import the wire from LWC adapter, and we would also import the track. So what we will do is now we'll create a track variable and we will say account object info, because we are going to basically fetch the information about account object. How we will do is we'll use @wire and then the method name, like within opening and closing curly braces. Sorry, these are parentheses, not curly braces. And then put a comma, use opening and closing curly braces. Here we need to provide object API name and make sure that you're typing it correctly, because if you mistype it, or maybe if you instead of a small o you make it as capital O, it's not going to work. It should be as it is, JavaScript case sensitive. So if we make changes into the variable, it's not going to work at all. Now what object we wanted to fetch is, let's say that I'm just putting it as static. Okay, for now it is account, or maybe let's create a variable here. Let's say that obj API name. Okay, so basically this is the one way that you could provide the variable directly here as part of your static, if you know that you wanted to fetch the information about which object. Or maybe I think someone from you was trying to fetch the information dynamically. I can't recall the name. So you could take the input from the user, which object you really wanted to work with. Let's say that we are saying account here. Okay, and you could just say $sign and the variable. So any value that you wanted to pass within your wire decorator, and that value is nothing, it's a variable, you need to use $sign and the name of your variable, as it's going to return a property or a function. So we are going to say wired account object info. And we talked about, remember the keyword should be same, error, and data. And use opening and closing parenthesis, it's done. Okay. Now you could just do the if condition, like if data, and you say else if error. So if there is a data, let's quickly do the console.log, and we'll say account object information, and that's data. We're not doing anything, and maybe if there is any error, so instead of log, we'll say console.error. So this is our basically error that we wanted to print. And before we deploy it, don't forget to expose it to the meta file, sorry, to a Lightning App Builder, and we're done. So I hope this is clear, not like, because this is very simple. So our code is there now in our Salesforce org. So let's test it. Okay, so here we could search for, I think it was object info API. Yeah. So let's put it here. So you could see here, like as soon as I added the component, the console, the wire method ran, and we actually got the console here. I hope you all can see the console. And then if we click on this little arrow to expand it, we would be able to see the complete information about the object, like what is the API name, associate entity, associate parent entity, default record type ID. Okay. Then what is the key prefix? Key prefix is nothing. The record ID, the first three letter of our record ID. Label, plural label, either it is layout table, that means we can create the layout or not. What are the name fields? Because this is a contact, we would only see one name field, but if it is a maybe account, not sorry, it is an account, that's why we see one, but if it is a contact, we would see two, like first name, last name, or maybe middle name. There are so many fields for the name. Record type infos, it actually gives you the information about your record types. If you have, I don't have record type, there is only one, that is master, which is by default available for all the objects. What is the theme about your org? What is the image of your account? If you really wanted to get the image of the account, right, and wanted to utilize it somewhere, you could just get it from here. You could see. And then if you see here, fields, it actually gives you the information about fields as well as including the pick list. So if you see for industry field, and you would not see the pick list values, but you would only see the information related to pick list. Okay, the pick list field, it says every single information, length, if it is a lookup or not, every single thing. And you would also be able to see child relationships, like what are the child related to account. So you could see that I've got so many, like mostly these are the standard one, but still I have some of the custom, like payment, location, invoice, and then account request. So you would see all the child object related to this account. So if you really wanted to, maybe you really have a requirement where you select an object, and based on selected object, you wanted to uh, display the information about that object, what are the fields, what are the child relationships, and maybe utilize the metadata API to make some changes, you could easily do with the help of this API without like writing the apex, writing the metadata API, and fetch the information. So this is this is one thing. Okay. Let me change the object API name from account to contact, and let's see what really happens with the with our name field we talked about, right? It only contains, for account it was only name, but for contact it should be the different. So we will clearly see that. So this time now the object name is contact, and if you see here, this time name fields, there are three fields: first name, last name, and name. And if I had enabled middle name and the salutation and other fields for my name, I would be able to see those fields as well over here. So you could clearly identify what exactly it is. So that's all about getting the object information. If you really wanted to know more about let's say how to get the multiple objects, there is a method called get object info, I think infos. It actually takes multiple object because it says infos. It's basically going to take multiple object. You pass the API name, it is going to give the information about those objects. We are not going to cover, but I would recommend you to go ahead and at least have a look what's the structure and how you could make it work. Now there was a question today as well, and I think 2-3 days before also we got a question. What like before creating a pick list? Okay, so how you create a pick list is like let's create the pick list field first. Okay, let's say options, and we would return something here. What we would return is, let's say every pick list is going to have label and value. And if anyone has any confusion, what is a label, what is value, please let me know, I'll explain. Do we know by using which fields are on the page layout, or whether it is read only or not? That we cannot get it here using this API. But if you want, there is again different ways, like metadata API or other things, but this API actually does not provide you. But if you I think if you really wanted to know which fields are editable or creatable, there is a method, I think within UI record API. I will showcase maybe after this demo. I'll showcase which method it is. You could use that method to get the information about what fields are editable. So I was asking, does anyone has any questions related to label or value? What is label and what is value?
No, sir.
Okay, so yeah, industry is okay there. Let's say, sorry, not industry, maybe let's say education. I'm just trying to prepare the industry picklist value. So one is education, one is banking, and there is April. I hope this spelling is correct. And then technology. So basically there are so many picklist values for account object, but I'm just using these four. And with the help of this getter variable, because this was a picklist returning some static values that I really don't need to change again and again. That's why I've used getter method. I could have also used a variable called something like this industry options, and then could have assigned the values statically. That will also work. So any option is good. You could go with anyone. There is nothing as such. You should always be using getter only. So let's quickly use a LWC combo box here. So name is could be anything. Label, let's say industry. Remove the placeholder and value. On change, I don't need. Options, this is really important for us. Options, what values we wanted to give the user in the drop down. So we really have created the name variable as options itself. So we would put it here and then we will deploy it. So basically what we are trying to do here is we are trying to say, let's assume that there is a field called industry on account object, and that has these four options for now. And we did it using combo box. We provided the values and it's really working well. Now customer has came, says, okay, now I really need to add these 4 or 5 new fields. Can you do me a favor and add it? So we will go ahead as a admin will go to the field, add those picklist values. But as we really don't know what are all the components where this picklist value is being used, we will not be able to change it there. And even if you know, let's say there are 5 components where you are using this way for displaying the pick list, then even after adding or removing the fields, the drop down is always going to display these 4 fields. It's not going to display the additional fields, or it's not going to display the field that we have removed. If we have to make it up to date, we really have to either add it here or we have to remove it. That means there is a complete deployment process going on, the complete change management process. So if you see here, we have got 4 fields, and later on, if we have to add one more, okay, like chemical. So I really have to do, maybe let's add chemical and remove April. So we really have to remove it here. Then only would be able to make the changes. Okay. That means the code changes are, yes, definitely there are code changes involved, and you cannot directly make changes to the production. Okay. So what if, is there any way we can make this as dynamic? Okay. Then there is a method comes into the picture that is again comes from UI object API, and the method name is get picklist values. Okay. Now it accepts 2 fields. One is record type ID and one is field API name. Which field you wanted to, you really wanted to basically fetch the value for. Okay. And your field API name is going to here, it really going to contain 2 things. One, for which object the field is and what is the field API name. Okay. So that's why you could see here for this field API name, this complete object, whatever we have imported is getting passed. And we have seen in the past that this industry field, it's going to take 2 attributes, object API name and field API name. Okay. So we would see how to make this as well dynamic. But for now, This takes two parameters. This get pick list values take two parameters. One is record type ID and one is field API name, and both are required. Okay. Now there could be a question in your mind where you say, what if I don't have a record type ID? So what I will do? Because this is a required field and I don't have a record type ID. So for those cases, this is the default record type ID that you need to utilize as it is. Salesforce, this is the default record type ID. So you need to utilize this. Okay. And then go ahead and fetch the information about a field. So if you don't have a record type ID, make sure you are using this default record type ID. From where you will get is, one way we have already seen this object info API, that from this we could get the record type infos. You could see here the record type ID. Okay. And this is basically the record type ID. I could share it here. Maybe you could keep it with your, or maybe you, if you go to the document, like if you go to component library and you search for within this reference, or maybe go to developer guide, and within the developer guide, go to reference and then go to UI asterisk API, then go to UI object info API and select get pick list values. So you would get the record type ID from here as well. Okay. And this is the same example I have basically showcased here. Okay. And yes, Simmer, this should be the exact value, but we would see like we are definitely going to change the value, and then we'll see what exactly happens. Either we are able to get the information about the pick list field or not. So we will import that method now, that is get pick list field value. Sorry, get pick list values. Okay. And here we would say @wire. The method name is get pick list values. It takes two parameters. Now, what are those two parameters? One is record type ID. Provide the value that we have just copied. I have just copied, so you need to copy it and provide it here. And then field API name. This takes the field API name. What it takes the object API name and field API. It actually takes the object. So first of all, let's import the field. So let's say industry field from Salesforce Apex, sorry, not Apex, schema, then account, then industry. Okay. And then pass it here. And like this, let's quickly copy and paste it. I will say now one important thing, you really need to change the name of your wired method that you are creating by your own, because if you don't change the name, this is really going to create the problem for you. Maybe this method is going to take over this, or maybe this method is going to take precedence over this. Like both will not work with the same name. There isn't, like, this is not written anywhere in the document. After doing like, I was stuck basically in a project where I used the same name and I was like completely stuck for 2-3 hours to debug this issue. So that's why I would say always change the name if you do the copy paste, because these days we are really I'll say used to do the copy paste. So we would be basically using only copy paste, like we would be making sure that we are changing this. Okay. So we said that account industry field info instead of object info. Now here as well, we will say account industry. And similarly here. So we just did the console information about account industry field now. Let's go ahead and deploy this, and then we would see how we could traverse the data and display into the UI. So any confusion, any questions so far? Am I going on the correct pace, or is there any like I need to go a little bit slow or something, please let me know. Okay, so if you see here, yeah, could you please confirm if you're able to see the console as well, like these two consoles, account industry as well as account? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so if you see here, right, this is our account industry information. And if you scroll down, sorry, if you click on this little arrow to expand the details, you would see there is something called values. That means in the field itself, you got values. So this data actually gives you the controlling values as well as the value of your picklist field. And this values actually is going to contain the information in the same format like label, value. If you remember, we talked about the picklist is going to have at least label and value. So it takes the label, it takes the value. And these are all the picklist field about the account industry field, picklist values. And if you now wanted to display it in the UI, so let's quickly say we're going to create @track object, and we will say industry options. This is nothing, it is an array. By default, it's blank. And here, yeah, this one, we will say this dot account industry, sorry, industry options equal to data dot values. Because values within this like within data is the parent object. Under the parent object, we have multiple fields, multiple attributes, and one of the attribute is values. So to access the picklist field, we will say data dot values. That is, we are going to access. And into the HTML, we are going to say instead of options, we will say industry OPT and deploy it. Taking the little steps towards creating the component. Now let's go ahead and again refresh this page. Okay, so we've got the details. If you click on the drop down, now you would see the complete details about your industry field. Now, if you go ahead, delete, activate, deactivate, you do whatever you would, this component is going to take care everything about your industry field. You really don't need to come and change the code at all because you are already handling it with the code itself. You're saying I'm going to fetch the picklist value dynamically for the given picklist. Okay. It shows all active picklist values. Yes. Okay. Now there was a question, do we need to use exact record type ID? So let me quickly remove the 3A from the last 3A from the record type ID. And after making those changes, let's deploy this and we would see if you're able to see the information or not. So if you see here, we are still able to see the values. Okay, but the URL it still says that it is using the, maybe there could be catching issue. So let's do the hard reload with the catching. Okay, so we are still able to see the values. We are still able to see the values here. So I cannot still say that it's working because sometimes there is a catching issue that really is bad for us. So we really need to make sure that there is no such catching issue. And you could go ahead and try it by providing a different value for this record type completely. Maybe let's say, I'm just saying something like this, okay? Just the bad value. This is not a record type. Because I do remember once I tried to change the value and we were not able to get the picklist value. So I'm still somewhere in that state that it's not going to work, but maybe Salesforce has made some changes. But you see here, we got this error while fetching account industry information because this record type is not correct. So maybe earlier it worked because of we only removed the last like 3 characters, that was AAA, so it might had taken it that after zeros, because this is 18 digit, I believe this is the 18 digit record ID. So if we remove the 15 digit, maybe it worked. So, but you really have to use this exact value. I would always highly recommend to use this exact value if you don't have a record type ID. Okay. Any questions so far? And Simar, yes, as far I know, it's really showcase the fetch the active values, because I've tested it quite not couple of time, I'll say good amount of time. But I would also say go ahead, maybe activate or deactivate a field and then test it. Okay, that you could definitely do. And if time permits, we'll do that, because there is one more thing that we need to cover. So this is one thing that we have. Okay. Now you might be saying that this is basically there is an import statement which says that which field I wanted to fetch, and maybe now I wanted to make this component as reusable. Okay, I wanted to take the object API name, I wanted to take the field API name, and then fetch the information about that pick list value and then showcase in a component. So let's do that. Let's make this as @API. The object name is @API, and let's by default it as it is account. Let's take another variable called field API name, and by default let's say it is industry. Okay. And now, because what is the information that this particular field takes? It really is it really is nothing. It is something like this, which takes object API name, sorry, object API name, whatever the object API name is, and then field API name. So basically, if we talk about what this returns, this is basically an object containing these two attributes. So now you could say here, maybe final field. Okay, now you need to prepare object API name you already have here. So you could say this dot object API name. Then you have field API name. So you could say this dot field API name. Okay. And this field you could refer here. Now, this is again a static value here, right? So you could also create a variable here @API and say record type ID. And by default, you could keep as it is. And then use this record type ID here. Let's go ahead and deploy this. So any confusion or any questions, what we just did here? Basically, we created three variables, three properties, which are now publicly exposed, that can be accessed either from the meta file, which is Lightning App Builder, or maybe these can be passed from the parent object if our component is being used within the parent object. So let's refresh this now. And it did not work because we're not able to see the UI here. We don't see the error. Okay, we really don't see the error here. We only see the account information, that is account, but that really didn't display the field information. Okay, let's see what really happens. Okay, we've got record type ID. Okay, can anyone point out the error?
I think the expression, the dollar expression is not there. Line number 20.
Yes, it should be dollar expression. It should also be dollar expression like this. Okay, so let's go ahead, deploy this, and hopefully this will work. And yes, it did, but we are really not able to see the field information. Like, we are able to see the component drop down is not getting displayed. Nothing is happening. We're not able to see the information here now. So what could be the issue? We've got field API name. It's really have two objects, like object API name, and it has field API name. Okay, what I will do is, to be honest, I really forgot the syntax, so I'll just go ahead, maybe do the console.log and print this industry field here. Object API name. Okay. Sometimes it really takes us to debug the information. So it takes field API name, whatever the field API name we have, it takes object API name, and this itself is an object. So maybe I will say this is correct. Object API name is also correct. Okay. So I've got object API name. For now, I'll just go ahead and hard code this to account. Okay. And then hard code this to industry. Just wanted to see if this is really working. And if not, then we'll see how it actually we are going to make it work. So if I hard code it, it really works. You see here. So there is some issue while. Okay, I got agriculture, everything is there. So now what could be the issue? Field API name.
I think Amit,
Okay.
you were using this keyword. Maybe because of that.
We can give it a try, but I don't think, because we really wanted to utilize these variables here. But let's try it. Yeah, could be. It's not even loading the complete page now. So we definitely have to use this because we really wanted to reference this variable. So this has to be used here. This dot, like this dot, some like this. Maybe I'll say field name instead of field API name. Not sure if that's the case, but still cannot take a chance here. We've got object API name, we've got field, account, and industry is correct field. Okay. And we've got final field. Let's see. So it's not working. I'll not take much time because we have to cover one thing, but I'll look into this in my time and will let you know tomorrow why it's not working dynamically. So for now, just keep as it is. Like this is basically the syntax I've already shown you. I really wanted to cover one thing, that is another part. There could be a huge case when you have record type, because just one thing that we talked about is we talked about what if I have a, like I wanted to read the pick list value dynamically. Now there is a huge case where we say that, okay, we definitely wanted to use case read the values dynamically, but based on the record type, whatever the record type you like I have, let's say I have got two different record types on the account, and based on the record types, we are controlling the pick list value. So now how we are going to fetch those information? So there is a method called get pick list values by record type. Okay. Now this method can really work for this, like this method can be replaced for this method as well, even if you don't have a record type or if you have a record type. So this method is going to be our go-to method every time we wanted to fetch the pick list information from any object. Either that object has a record type or that object does not have a record type. If the object does not have a record type, you need to pass the default record type ID. If the object does have a record type, you need to pass that record type ID based on which you wanted to read the pick list value. Now this method actually takes a different parameter called object API name. And this is going to be your object API name like account, contact, or maybe case, opportunity, custom object, could be anything. So you really need to provide your object API name here. So now I'm really going to comment out this part up to here. Okay. So let's import that method now, that is get picklist values by recorder type, because as its name indicates, we are going to get the picklist value by the record type. If you hover over this method, you would see that the API name of your object is the first parameter. Second parameter is record type ID. It says that pass this as a master record type ID, because this is your record type ID for the master record type. So let's do this, maybe copy paste, change the method name. Everything else is going to be same here now. Okay. Now we are not going to assign the value directly here. So remember, there were two parameters. One was object API name. So we need to pass object API name. And then one was a record type ID. Okay. So for object API name, we could pass values like this account, or you could import the object using the import statement. Okay. Like you already know how to import the object, this one. You could utilize that directly here. Sorry, not this one. This is the wrong place here. My go-to is I always utilize the variable and then use that variable here instead of importing it. The reason, because I really might want it to make this component dynamic based on, it could be any object. So I would use this one, which is object API name, and pass it here. Okay, and instead of now what we will say account object picklist information, and similarly here. So are we clear with this, like the method? Because this is going to be our go-to method for fetching any picklist values. In the field API name, can we directly write account.industry? That's not going to work. We can give it a try maybe later on, but I'm sure it's not going to work. Because it takes object API name and field API name. It is an object like this. So it is expecting in the same format. You cannot change the format. So you have to provide the same. So yeah, I was asking any questions on this method, because this is going to be our go-to method while we are fetching any picklist values for any object.
I mean, for a custom picklist fields also the same logic will apply, right? I mean, this
Custom object, right?
custom picklist, like standard picklist we are using, right? Industry.
Yes,
So
yes. It's
similarly for custom picklist field also the same logic will apply.
yes, yes. It's same. Okay. Is it fetch all the picklist values? I didn't get the question quite. You guys, I think if you could just maybe unmute yourself and ask the question.
So to get in the picklist value, there is no option to pass the picklist value, right? Which picklist value we need to get. So there we have only two parameters. One is record type and one is object. So is this method fetch all the picklists available on the object, or a single picklist?
Yes, all the picklist values.
Okay, got it.
So you could see we got account object picklist information. There is the first label of your iteration is picklist field values. If you expand it, you'd see there is a field attribute called picklist field values. Under this picklist field values, you will find all the picklist, including the custom one, active, SLA, like you are able to see those. And if you maybe expand any of those, like field name, under that you would see values, and this is going to give you the list of values list of like all the values that you have for that pick list field. And this is going to be, these values are going to come based on the record type object, whatever the record type you have provided for that object. So if it is a master record type like this, it's going to give you all the pick list field values. If you have a record type, it's going to only give the information about that pick list based on the record type. Okay. Now, how you are going to traverse this? How you're going to traverse this? Like how you're going to get the pick list for your pick list field, the values. So the first level of iteration is pick list field values. Then second is you need to know which field you wanted to get. And then values is the attribute. So this is like you have to say, maybe let's do the copy paste. So you need to say pick list field values dot the name of your maybe yes, dot notation is the one, true. So you have to do like pick list field values dot, let's say you wanted to get account source dot values. This is how you will get the options. Now, if we want for industry, we really have to say pick list values dot industry dot values, and we will get the industry information. So let's now here, let's say this dot industry option equal to what dot notation we just tried, pick list values dot industry dot values. And let's deploy this and see if we are able to get the information or not. Okay, so let's refresh this now. We got, okay, my bad. It should be data dot pick list values, okay? Because data is going to contain the pick list values. Then pick list value contains industry, and industry has values which actually gives you the array of all the pick list fields. And let's refresh this page now. And you would see now all the pick list values for the industry object are getting printed here. We are able to select any field that we want to. Okay. Now there could be again a question. I wanted to make it dynamic. I've got object API name that we are already referencing in our method. I've got field API name. I could change it to whatever I need. Okay. So how I'm going to dynamically make this work for the field that I provided. So instead of this method, which really didn't work for us pick list values, we would always use get pick list values record type. I've got the field that is field API name contains the API name of my field. So can anyone let me know how we could make this? Can someone write the syntax here?
Can you please repeat your question?
So basically, I have got all the pick list values here. Okay, in this data dot pick list values up to here, like say data dot pick list values. I've got all the fields here. Now I wanted to fetch whatever the field API name I have here. It could be industry, it could be active. Let's say active. I wanted to fetch this information here dynamically. How we would be fetching this?
Dot field API.
But you cannot say dot field API name because this dot pick list field values does not have any attribute called dot field API name.
Within in bracket, basically in array brackets.
Like this?
Yes.
Exactly.
Dot
That's
field
how we need to access, because this field API name contains active. Active is definitely there within this data dot pick list field values. Okay, so if we really maybe interpret it as a compiler, so this is how the compiler is going to find. It's going to find like this. And as this field is having all the pick list field values and active is one of them, it's going to give you the field. And then maybe you could say Now here you really need to make sure you're doing the error handling. So you could say, first of all, you could say like data.picklist values, store it in a variable, and then use if there is some value in this picklist values and there is some value for the field that we really wanted to fetch the information about. And then within this if condition, say you've got picklist field values. Now you really don't need this data, and say values. So you are already making sure that there is some data, then only go within the if condition and fetch these values from whatever the dynamic field we have, and then deploy it. And then just go ahead and refresh this. Field API name is not defined. Yes, it should be this dot field API name, and here as well. So you would be able to see the picklist field values, yes and no, because that's what I have within my active picklist field. I can select anyone. Later on, if I wanted to change it to maybe type, I could change it to whatever the type I have. And then if you really want, you could just expose it with the help of target configs. And you could have maybe, let's say, target config by default, let's say home page. And I wanted to expose the property. So property name is going to be object API name. Type is a string. Default is, let's say, account. It is required, true. One is this property. The second one is field API name. Type is a string. Default is industry. Required is true. And third one is record type ID. By default, whatever we have here. So now what we did is we are basically exposing these three property to the user, to the admin user, and saying that, okay, give us the object API name, field API name. We are going to give you the drop down for that pick list. Okay. So we really have to go ahead and edit this page, because now we wanted to test it based on the user provided the input. It is changing or not. So select your component. Now let's change. I don't know any field on contact, but I have object case, which really have a status pick list value. Okay. So let's go ahead and save this. So for case, we've got a status. We're going to get back to our home page, and you would see now we're able to see the status value for our case object itself. So we are dynamically able to take the object API name, field API name, and make it work. Now you could take the field API, like you could say label of your pick list field. You can take. You can take if your pick list field is required or not. You could take what is the name of your pick list field. You could basically accept every single thing. Maybe you can say label. You can say placeholder. You can say either the pick list field is required or not. So you could just use whatever. Maybe you would also say show label if you wanted to show the label or not. So basically every single thing you can take the input from the user and bind the variable here into your UI component, and everything is going to be changed, and it is going to act as a dynamic component. So basically, if I have to tell you is that what we did is we really created a dynamic picklist component that can be utilized for any object picklist field. Okay. And you could have a method here, say on change, and you can say handle change. And on the click of this method, have a parameter called event. Okay. Do the prevent default, and you can just process like we talked about, right? Event. So we could have, let's say, selected event, and we can pass a new custom event here where we say pick list selected or pick list change instead of selected. And you can pass the details about what details you can pass here is maybe you can pass object API name, what object API name it is, this dot maybe always API name. What is the field API name? You can pass that as well. You definitely need to pass the value. What is the value? So you will say event dot target dot value. So these are the information, and then you can just say this dot dispatch event and dispatch this event. So wherever you're, maybe if you are using this component within any other components, right? Let's say you are trying to create an account record and you really need the industry information about account. You could use this component there, pass the required information, and then handle this event. It is going to give you whatever the field has been changed to. So this is it. Any questions? We definitely have assignments, but any questions before we go ahead? We also have questions today. So if not, these are all the questions, like what is Lightning Data Service, benefits? Can we use dynamic fields in LDS? What is the difference between Lightning Record Form and Lightning Record Edit Form and Lightning Record View Form? So we are definitely going to share the survey as we did for the previous questions. So this is the assignment that you have to do is, you really have to create a component, which is again a LWC, where you're going to fetch the account information, fetch the account picklist information, and then create a Lightning combo box to display the account industry information, create the input fields to take the input for account and phone, then have a button on the same component, like create account. And once you click on create account, it should create the account for the selected industry. Okay. Second assignment is really going to be big. You really need to create 3 Lightning different web components. And these are going to be responsible for creating the account, contact, and opportunity. And this component is going to sit on the Lightning homepage of any application. Okay. Now, what you have to do is, these are the 3 different Lightning Web components which are going to be responsible for creating the taking the input, like one for account, one for contact, one for opportunity. Okay. Take the required fields that you wanted to have. Then you need to create another Lightning Web component that is going to have a picklist field. Okay. And these are the 3 options that we'll have in the picklist field, like account, contact, and opportunity. And based on whatever the object you select from a picklist field, let's say you selected account. So you need to render your component that is responsible for creating the account. So one of the component that you have created here earlier. If you select contact, it's going to render the component responsible for creating the contact record. Similarly for opportunity. Provide now it says on the click of save button in any of the 3 components, it should fire a custom event. Event name is basically save. So basically you need to fire a custom event save, and we'll send the record ID of the created record. So basically you really don't need to worry about which component is going to handle the event. All you need to worry about is once you click on save button, the record should get created within Salesforce. A custom event should get fired named as save. And that event details should contain the record ID of the saved record. Okay. And the component will display the message. You could display the message in the HTML, says record ID is created successfully. Okay. So basically you really need to use component composition. You really need to use dynamic rendering. You really need to use object info API. You really need to use LDS UI create record method for creating the record. Any questions so far for this assignment number 2? Okay, I don't see. Yeah, that's what we have for the assignment.